like to welcome everybody to the annual Karl Kinanen Public Lecture in this beautiful location. Hamilton's a beautiful town, and does not everybody agree? Look at the view here. So on behalf of the Deborah Center for Studies in Aging, in partnership with the Alzheimer's Society of Hamilton and Halton, as well as the Geriatric Education and Research Center, GERIS at Hamilton Health Sciences, we'd like to welcome you today to the annual Karl Kinanen Public Lecture. So we're very delighted to have a lot of people show up today. I know a lot of staff from Hamilton Health Sciences are here, so I'd like to welcome them, and I'm sure from St. Joseph's as well. Learning to be old has been a big draw this year, I can tell from the audience, so we're really excited everybody's here. So thank you for coming and joining us today.
Thank you. Welcome. My name is Anushka Dwyer, and I'm one of the public education coordinators with the Alzheimer's Society. We've been partnered with Deborah Center for many years now. Together we promote awareness about issues related to aging and to alleviate personal and social consequences of Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. I see some familiar faces here, so this tells me that our partnership is working. Out of the Deborah Center for Studies in Aging, there's been tremendous advancements in research and care regarding dementia in the city of Hamilton. This cutting-edge dedication has influenced many people at the Alzheimer's Society. A number of our staff were graduates of the program. This work benefits the Alzheimer's Society in many ways. Karl's work has set an example for healthy aging. We now know that there are many controllable risk factors to brain health, such as physical and mental fitness. There is a continued focus on independence and autonomy as we age. It is our goal to maximize opportunities for education, but also recognize the dyad of carer and individual in need. Aging well means delaying the onset of dementia through a healthy lifestyle. But for those who begin to experience cognitive deterioration, there is education and support. The Alzheimer's Society has a variety of services that range from education to counseling and support services to health promotion programs. We have some very special programs, such as our Creative Expressions program, which is an art therapy program, and our Living Well exercise program, where people can exercise their body and their minds. We have support groups for couples and individuals with dementia, such as our frontotemporal dementia support group. And it's all listed in our handy new guide, which I have at the back if anybody is interested, and if anybody has any questions, please do come see me afterwards. So, I would also like to introduce Beatrice Kinanen. Beatrice is going to share an amazing story about her husband, Karl Kinanen, in just a few minutes, and she has a wonderful story of her own. Any of you that have worked in Hamilton for a period of time will remember that Bea was the executive director of the Catholic Children's Aid Society. Beatrice worked hard for children at risk in our communities and lobbied for them to have high-quality lives. And I know that she is now doing the same thing for people who are aging in our communities. So please join me in welcoming Beatrice Kinanen.
Welcome everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people here today. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce my husband Karl. It's an honor to have his contribution to the study of gerontology at McMaster recognized through this lecture. In the mid-70s, while teaching social work at McMaster, Karl became concerned that our educational system didn't recognize the special concerns of the elderly. Coupled with this, he believed seniors were being neglected as compared to other developed countries. At the time, Canada had the largest percentage of institutionalized persons owing to a lack of in-home services. Karl designed the first introductory course in gerontology to educate people about the unique needs of the elderly and to enable them to give direct practical help to seniors. His hope was that formal studies in aging would awaken the need for more professional services and create awareness and interest in older people. Along with organizing opportunities for his students to work with seniors in various settings, Karl asked older adults from the community to volunteer to meet weekly with first-year gerontology students to share their knowledge and experience about life and aging. The Senior Assistance Program, as it's known, has continued to thrive at McMaster over the past 28 years, allowing youth to become acquainted with positive role models for meaningful and creative aging. Karl's legacy lives on at McMaster University in the Department of Health, Aging and Society, where now both master's and doctoral degrees in health, aging and society are accessible, in addition to the undergraduate degree that Karl initiated. Our thanks to the Deborah Center for Studies in Aging, the Alzheimer's Society of Hamilton and Halton, and the Geriatric Education and Research in Aging Sciences Center, GERAS, at St. Peter's for bringing this event to the community. I hope you enjoy the lecture. Thank you.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm Amanda Grenier, Director of the Deborah Center for Studies in Aging, and I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker today. We're delighted to have Deborah here with us. Deborah Van Hoonaard served as Canada Research Chair from 2006 to 2015. She's a professor in gerontology at St. Thomas University in Fredericton. She's author of several books, including The Widow's Self, The Older Woman's Journey Through Widowhood, and By Himself, The Older Man's Experiences of Widowhood. She frequently gives talks, public talks, media interviews. A number of you may have heard her on the radio. And she talks about opposing ageism, prejudice, and discrimination against older people. So I won't take any more of your time, and I'll let Deborah speak to us today about what it means to grow old and meaning of growing old. Thank you.
I'm always too short for these. Right, it's delightful to be here. Thank you, and thank you to the Deborah Center and the Amandas and the sponsors, and I feel very honored to give a lecture in the name of Karl Kinanen. Obviously, he's been a very important person in the study of aging and in setting up education around aging in Canada, so I'm very grateful for that. This talk is about how one learns to be old. I'm not talking about how one adapts to illness, disability, or other challenges that might come with age. After all, I'm a sociologist who hears a buzzing. I'm a sociologist who's interested in social process. In other words, how the way people react to us and treat us teaches us that we are old. I began thinking about this process about 15 years ago when I was at a conference devoted to qualitative research, which is the kind of research I do. I never missed this conference, which has papers on all kinds of topics. They are united by the research approach that explores how people understand their world and that sees people as experts in their own lives. Each year, there are a few papers that stand out. They are fascinating, and the topics might be far from those that I study. My own topics mostly focus on the transitions that come with age. I'm always on the lookout for these papers that are very different but interesting. They inspire me and often provide a new way of looking at things, even when their topics seem far, far away from things I normally study. One of these papers was called Learning to be Black by Effa Eteroma. The title was intriguing. When he arrived in Canada, Effa thought of himself as African, but he soon learned that in the Canadian context, he was not African. He was Black. How did he find this out? Through the way people treated him. He learned that he had to dress formally to go to the bank so that he would appear trustworthy, and that he might be followed in a grocery store. The thing I liked best in the paper was his description of how his white roommate taught him about jazz because as a black person, he was supposed to like jazz. Epis was not an angry paper. It simply explained the social process through which he learned how to be black in Canada. I was enchanted. After all these years, this paper still resonates for me. It made me think about how we learn to be old through the way people react to us and through the way they treat us. Many people believe that we can stay young, and in my paper it's stay young, by exercising and not paying attention to what others think. But no matter what you do, people begin to treat you in ways that tell you that you're no longer young, that you're getting old. And through this, you learn to be old. Here are some personal examples. It's your birthday, and people say, "How old are you? 29? You're in your 40s. These are my personal stories. You're in your 40s, and you and your teenage daughter are introduced to someone who says, "Oh, are you sisters?" And you're supposed to go, "Oh." People are amazed at your age, or that you're a grandmother. I'm turning 65 tomorrow, so I'm really into the you can't be that age. And for women, once you approach menopause, the doctor never sees you as healthy again, because he or she believes that menopause is a hormone deficiency disease. In other words, people let us know that they see us as old by the way they talk to us and treat us, often showing discomfort by couching their words in teasing or joking. We learn we are old, or at least not young, by the way others react to us. The way that we organize society and the social meaning of aging have an undeniable impact on the way we experience aging. We live in a society in which ageism, which is prejudice and discrimination against people based on being old, is endemic. We take it so for granted that we do not recognize it in our own behavior and discourse. Think for a moment about the jokes you yourself may have made about some aspect of aging, or about the reluctance people have to use the word old to describe someone else or themselves. Research shows that people resist the label old well into their 70s, 80s, or even 90s in order to maintain the fiction that you are only as old as you feel. Language has an important place in learning to be old. Humorous discourse not only teaches us that we are becoming old, but also allows us to uncover prejudice. One of the few groups that it is still socially acceptable to joke about is old people. So, we hear about senior moments. Anybody ever use the phrase senior moments? This phrase is often used lightheartedly to diffuse embarrassment when someone has a momentary lapse of memory of someone's name, where she or he puts something down or has a word on the tip of his or her tongue. To get the joke, we must connect being old with memory loss or functional incompetence. These connections reinforce prejudice against the old. The many euphemisms associated with aging, senior, golden ager, those kinds of things, confirm the problem. Terms that refer to old people often make them, especially old women, seem like children. So they might be called cute. Couples are often called cute. I think this desexualizes them and takes the passion out of their relationship. I'm going to be married 40 years this April, and we are adorable, but we're not cute. Sweet is another term you hear. Over the hill, 80 years young. Being referred to as dear or honey. Any Newfoundlanders here? Except in Newfoundland, where everyone is dear or honey. Someone says dear or honey, and I look at my husband with that look. He says, maybe they're from Newfoundland. And I say, they can't all be from Newfoundland. We live in the Maritime, so they really can't be from Newfoundland. Bill Thomas, an important thinker on aging, has commented that the term the elderly makes old people seem all alike. Old people do not refer to themselves as elderly. Some of my students called old people elderlies. That one gets me. This term allows us to ignore the fact that people who are old have had full lives. They did not pop into existence at age 80. Ageism has also led to apocalyptic ideas about what it means to have a large number of old people in the population. The media and many politicians reinforce the negative picture we have of what it means to have a larger percentage of older people in the population through the way they talk about it. Their language is negative, alarmist, and completely inaccurate. And so we hear terms like the silver tsunami, right? Unsupportable healthcare costs, the burden of an aging population. We see headlines like these every day. They make one of the great successes of our time, longer life expectancy, seem like a disaster. So if you take a look around this room, you'll see a lot of us who are older, not young, whatever word you like. 50, 60, 70 years ago, we wouldn't be here. People did not live a long time. This is a huge success. These terms also misrepresent the situation. Let's take a minute and think about what a tsunami is. It is a destructive wave that comes out of nowhere and destroys everything in its path. You've known about the aging population for a very long time, so it certainly didn't come out of nowhere. In addition, old people contribute much to our society in terms of experience, help to families, volunteering, and amazingly, even paying taxes. The strong, though incorrect belief that all older people are basically the same means that many people see an old person as old first and as a person second, rather than as a person who happens to be old and who is an individual with a variety of experiences and attributes like anybody else. When one part of your identity takes on such exceptional importance, it becomes your master status. It tends to wipe out any other status you may have had during your life. It's kind of like being convicted of being a murderer. Once you've been convicted of being a murderer, nothing else matters. Once you're old, sometimes nothing else matters. When old person is our master status, others attribute most of our behavior or personality to our being old, rather than to who we are as individuals. We see this starkly when someone is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Often, everything that had mattered about that person evaporates, leaving only the diagnosis to account for whatever the person does or thinks. And I think we can take a second over to the side and say, thanks to Alzheimer's societies, really around the world, that's beginning to erode a little bit, but not as much as I'd like to see it. Only highly prominent people seem to be able to avoid the master status of being old, and then only for so long. The master status of being old reflects ageism that is premised on the idea that old people are all essentially alike. In fact, research shows that older persons are very diverse, and that those over 85 are notable for their heterogeneity and wide range of experience. One example of old age as a master status is pointed out by psychologist Mary Pfeiffer in another country, who comments that when older people are involved in a car accident, their mistakes are not viewed as accidents, but rather as loss of functioning. Indeed, even when an accident is not their fault, others may still attribute the accident to their age. This type of attribution can have implications for the freedom of individuals whose capacity to drive may be questioned just because they have lived a certain number of years. Even someone whose reaction time may have slowed somewhat is perhaps less dangerous on the road than someone who has his radio cranked up, is talking on the cell phone or texting, and drinking a cup of coffee, all at the same time. Yet, when there is an older person involved in an accident, there will be discussion on the news day after day about the problems of older drivers. If you know everything you know like I do from CBC, you can see that you might have a whole month of talking to specialists about this. Although much discussion among researchers, as well as in the media, has focused on the characteristics of older populations as individuals, gerontologists have seldom, although fortunately more recently, a little bit more, asked old people themselves about their own experiences. Many use a pathology model of aging. Old people are seen as not well equipped to carry on normal functions. As a result, they may find their independence restricted, but input from the elderly people on such matters is seldom asked. If we go back to driving, the issue of older drivers is usually looked at from an overwhelming technological perspective. They are assumed to have problems resulting from biological, cognitive, and social degeneration. There is little emphasis in their everyday reality. In other words, asking old people about their experience as drivers does not seem to occur to those who study and write about older drivers. Thus, another way we learn to be old is finding out that our understanding of our own lives is not considered even when decisions are being made that affect us directly, or when our neighbors and family members are being encouraged to surveil us and report on us if our driving isn't up to snuff, simply because we're old. The fact that we automatically assume that any older person may not be mentally competent also has ramifications for how health professionals may treat her or him. Imagine how you would feel if you were at the hospital or visiting your doctor and everyone started conversations with you by asking if you knew what month it is, or who the Prime Minister is. This testing of mental alertness is foisted on nursing home residents as a matter of course. Even if we do not suspect that an individual has dementia, we often think that once someone becomes old, she or he is no longer capable of judging the risk of certain activities, for example, living alone. When I interviewed older women about their experiences of becoming widows, many of them told me that their adult children, particularly their sons, for some reason, immediately questioned their capacity to make their decisions. Inconceivably, along with this prejudice around aging, comes the idea that we can and should fight aging. If we do it right, we can always be young. When we believe that line, we blame people who do not age how we call successfully. Women feel this pressure more intensely. As women enter middle and old age, they become invisible. Karl Kinanen remarks that as we get older, we watch ourselves grow invisible to youth worshippers and to the male gaze. Some women find the experience of invisibility freeing. In a study I did a few years ago with a colleague about older women's challenges and strategies of everyday lives, some of our research participants said that one of the best things about being older is that they no longer care what anyone thought about them, partially because no one was paying any attention to them. Laura Hurd Clark, after 10 years of talking to older women about their appearance, concludes that they are influenced by ageist discourse that narrowly defines beauty in terms of the possession of youthfulness. They are also normatively dissatisfied with their bodies. That means that all women are dissatisfied with their bodies because that's how you're supposed to be. The same way that young women are. Women are influenced by the universal idea that youthfulness is naturally better. There is a moral imperative to fight the signs of aging, using all available means not to look their age. And I gave a talk in my daughter's class last week at McMaster here, and several of them in their 20s, women, admitted that they were already using cream to keep their faces young. In terms of appearance, learning to be old is being complimented for looking young. I don't look younger than 65. This is what 65 looks like. Although the pressure on women is still greater than men, men are now coming under the same kind of scrutiny. Years ago, I warned my students that the women's market was becoming saturated. They're coming after you next, I said. The men in my class didn't believe me, but sadly, I was right. I would much prefer to have been wrong and to have everybody to have backed off. It seems that in recent years, we have come to believe that if only we can control everything, we will eliminate risk. If we believe the old are, by definition, vulnerable and fragile, then our inclination may be to protect those individuals, all of them. However, in our attempt to minimize risk, we are likely to constrain the activities of older people, as well as to minimize their freedom of choice. This reluctance to allow, and again I have allow like this, older people to make their own judgments about personal risk is in sharp contrast to our evaluation of a younger person's taking risks. I was starkly reminded of this difference when I read an account of an expedition to climb Mount Everest. I can't think of any activity more risky than such a climb. Nonetheless, we don't stop people from making such attempts, and we even admire them. If they were old, we would surely confine them for their own good, rather than let them do something so foolhardy. So part of learning to be old is having your decision-making questioned and no longer being allowed to take risks, because we often think about old people as if they were children. None of us are immune to the cultural influences that devalue old people in general, and old women even more particularly. If we think we are, then we think we could be in a smoke-filled room without inhaling the smoke. Often people believe that they can stay young by exercising and not paying attention to what others think. But no matter what you do, people begin to treat you in ways that tell you that you're no longer young, that you're getting old. And through this, you learn to be old. This protectiveness has a gender dimension that should not be overlooked. Women live longer than men. Women are more likely to be poor than men. Women face higher risk of illness and disability than men. Women are more likely to live alone than men, and to enjoy it. And men don't tend to enjoy it as much. Women are more likely to both give and receive care, a contribution that's often overlooked. We also believe and encourage older women to believe that they face a higher risk of criminal victimization than other people. Even though young men are more likely to be the victims of violent crime than any other group, it is old women who cower behind their doors because they have learned to be vulnerable. One woman I interviewed said that she had heard that she should look under her car before entering at night in case there's a man waiting underneath to grab her ankle. What's the likelihood of that? In New Brunswick? In the winter? So for many women, learning to be old is learning to believe that there are so many dangers lurking everywhere and wait for them that they should probably stay home, lock the door, and throw away the key. Ageism leads to our treating old people as if they were fundamentally different from the rest of us. As well, through the growth and institutionalization of retirement, old people have become welfareized. That is, seen primarily in terms of needing various forms of welfare. In a society such as ours, where independence and being productive are accorded such importance, the aged may be seen as parasitic on the state and ultimately on the wage-earning taxpayers. These attitudes mask inequality within the older population and the fact that many old people are active in the labor force and make non-economic contributions to their families and the communities in which they live. It also leads to an increase in age segregation. And we know, regardless of the group, that any segregation increases ageism. So the more old people move themselves off to seniors' places, the fewer young people they will interact with, and the more the ageism will increase. Ageism, with its assumption of biological decline, is often compassionate, characterizing old people as poor dears. This brand of ageism actually had its use at one time because it improved the economic status of many retired people, but it also contributes to the continuing marginalization of older people. We see this in policies of mandatory retirement, which seems to be on its way out, and in times of high unemployment, where people are offered the golden handshake, or there are other kinds of pressures on them. And so now another way we learn to be old is being given the message that it's time to retire and give up working so that the young can have a chance. But here's my question. Why is it the role of older people to give up working in times of higher unemployment? Why don't all the men stay home so women can have a chance? They've had a chance. It's women's turn. Why don't all the white people stay home so people of color can have a chance? White people have had all the chances for as long as anybody can remember. But we would never say anything like that. But we do say it about the old. It's something to think about. Related to this issue is our focus on the independence-dependence dichotomy. In our society, we believe you are either independent or dependent. It's independent, you're good. It's dependent, you're bad. But the reality is that we are all interdependent. What's made us human? We are human because we are interdependent. But when we forget about that, then becoming dependent becomes a huge problem. Because biological decline has been such a central assumption of so much aging research, there has been a focus on describing the characteristics of individuals rather than how the social context within which they live might affect their experience of being old. This approach is called blaming the victim because it ignores the social forces that make old age difficult, while attributing the difficulty to the characteristics of the very people who are the victims of those social forces. It's kind of like a circle. Therefore, blaming the victim results in treating the symptoms of discrimination rather than treating the discrimination itself. One example of how we might blame the victim comes from a class discussion. One of my students, who had worked as a telephone interviewer, commented that whenever she gets an old woman on the phone, she knows she will have trouble getting her off. This student wanted to know why old women talked so much. The student was identifying over-talkativeness as a characteristic of old women. That is, she was blaming the victim. After some discussion, we finally came to the conclusion as a class that it might be useful to find out what aspect of our culture leads to older women sometimes being so isolated that they will talk to anyone who will listen. We might also wonder if the stereotype leads to people's exaggerating the tendency of some older people to want to stay on the phone so long, even with a stranger. So another aspect of learning to be old for women may be a belief that they have nothing important to say. Many of the widows that I spoke to in my research expressed a concern that they might be talking too much, or wasting my time, or having nothing of interest to say. Believe me, they had much to say, and much to say that inspired me with their creativity and with their resilience.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Me neither. Many ways that people begin to treat us differently as we age happen so gradually that we're almost unaware of them. But I had an experience that put these changes into the spotlight for me. This happened the year I spent the winter in Florida with my mother. I was in for a great surprise. Suddenly, I was no longer old or even middle-aged. I was 30 years younger than my mother and all her friends, and visibly younger than the majority of people in the Sunbelt retirement haven. I've been visiting this area for years and had always thought of myself as the kid. I sat in the backseat of the car, right? I was the kid in the family. I did what the adults wanted to do. I went where they wanted to go. I was a kid. I still sat in the backseat of the car this year, but the way others reacted to me when I was out with this older group surprised me. They went out to dinner together every Thursday, and I joined them. On one particular occasion, the waiter treated us as if I were the only adult at the table, comprised of one man and 5 women over 75. Me. He asked me if I was the leader. When the meal had been served, the waiter came over to me and asked how everything was. He didn't address this question to anyone else at the table. He was clearly talking just to me. I responded by saying that my meal was fine, but that he should ask everyone because I only knew how my own food was. The waiter made a dismissive remark about how they were only having soul, and that's always fine. Not only were the others not all having soul, but this comment completely dismissed them as adults. Was I now the adult? Another illustration that actually ages the story. My mother and my aunt and I were at a box store where my aunt was buying a new VCR. So it's an older story. I was about 50 at the time. She had bought VCRs before and did not need my help. In fact, I was chatting with my mother as my aunt discussed the purchase with the salesman. I didn't ask any questions or address any remarks to him. He, on the other hand, directed all his answers to me. I countered by saying, "Don't tell me, tell her. I'm not buying the VCR, she is." Finally, when my aunt had made her choice, the salesman tried to hand the slip for the cashier to me, whereupon I told him again, "Give it to my aunt. She was buying the VCR." What happened here? A final case. My mother and I were at the deli making one last purchase of my beloved Jewish food before I headed back to the Maritimes. The man behind the counter was probably in his late 20s. He looked at the two of us and asked if I was the daughter. We said yes, I was. Then he commented that I was very pretty and asked how old I am. I told him my age and he appeared incredulous. Supposedly, I looked much younger. In addition, even though he was supposed to sell the 1/4 pound of the very expensive hand-sliced lox as a minimum, he wrapped up less. My mother's comment was that I should always go along with her because she got much better service when I was there. For her, learning to be old included being treated dismissively at best and rudely at worst by salespeople and waitstaff in stores and restaurants. These experiences were not isolated. A woman at the flea market remarked to me that I was the youngest person there, and a toll collector joked that I was smiling too much for Florida, and that a policeman was going to arrest me for smiling so much. He doesn't have scared Canadians or American policemen. I began to realize in the society of retirement community dominated South Florida, I was not middle-aged or old. I was young. Being old is really quite relative. I also realized more fundamentally that when I really was young, I had probably been treated in a superior fashion to what I am now used to, but that I hadn't realized it. When you haven't experienced anything different, the preferential treatment you receive as a young woman is invisible to you. It simply seems natural. You can't recognize that you're in a privileged position. In conclusion, I'd have to say that learning to be old is learning to live in a society that devalues old people and believes them to be inferior. Our propensity for age segregation exacerbates this situation. I was interested to find out from my students that they saw the Fredericton Mall as the old person's mall, and that old people are encouraged to limit their days of shopping to the days that there are special discounts for them. Add to this the age-segregated housing, and we have a situation in which the only old people that many young people know are their grandparents, if they know them. This age segregation that has become more and more pronounced in Western society allows the stereotypes we associate with aging to continue. It is both a result of ageism and a cause of ageism. One of the most powerful ways to combat any type of prejudice, whether of race, religion, or age, is for people to get to know one another. It is imperative that we seek a way for old people and young people to interact on a regular basis, so that learning to old does not mean learning to be only with the old. I'd like to close with a quotation from Kofi Annan's International Year of Older Persons address. He said, "A society for all ages is one that does not caricature older persons as patients and pensioners. Instead, it sees them as both agents and beneficiaries of development. It honors traditional elders in their leadership and consultative roles in communities throughout the world. And it seeks a balance between supporting dependency and investing in lifelong development." Thank you.
Thank you. A fantastic way to bring together the research that you've been doing in various areas, right? And I'm sure our audience appreciates that. And we now turn over the floor for questions, any thoughts. There's a roaming mic that Amanda has at the back. So don't be shy. Please just kind of, yeah.
I was just wondering, your research and okay.
Yeah, if you don't mind using the mic in case it's easier for people to hear what's.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if people could use the microphone just so it's easier to hear.
Yeah. Well, I was just wondering, your research and what you're talking about, I think, is based mostly on studies in Canada and possibly the United States. Would you say that the conclusions that you draw can be applied to other societies?
Thank you. That's a great question. Yes, this is mostly drawn on North American examples and mainstream North American examples. In other words, it's not based on studies of First Nations, for example. We know that throughout much of the world, ageism is pretty common. Now, in some parts of the world where old people are valued elders, learning to be old would be learning to be more respected. You'd still learn to be old because you're still changing that. An interesting aspect of that speech that Kofi Annan gave, and if you're interested, I'm sure it's on the internet or in the library or wherever you might go to find things. It's a wonderful speech. He actually warns the developing world. He says, do not adopt these practices from the West. Do not. Sadly, we do tend to export our ways of thinking in the West. But certainly there are parts of the world where we would not have this finding, and we would do well to learn from them. Yeah.
You suggested that there should be more interaction between youth and seniors. I agree, but how do you promote that? How do you get that going in a community?
It's a challenging question because it's so ingrained, isn't it? It's so ingrained. Lots of older people are very eager to get into a more age-segregated housing, for example, because we're so used to thinking that teenagers are so loud and difficult. Old people have as many prejudices against young people, I think, as vice versa. But certainly there are some really wonderful examples that are beginning. So in the Netherlands, there are some nursing homes that give free housing to university students if they spend a few hours hanging around the nursing home with the residents there. Now, I'm not talking about volunteers who are portering people, another term I love, or teaching them to sing a song or teaching them a craft. Really just hanging out, just being there, being part of the social fabric. So I think that if we're creative, we really can come up with lots of ways. But I do think that having seniors discounts only 1 day a week contributes to age segregation. We could just give it in general. Why is it 1 day a week? It takes all the old people to the mall on 1 day and all the old people to stay away, never see them. So there are lots of simple things, but there are lots of creative things being done in a lot of places. There are wonderful elders in school programs that have taken place. We certainly had one in Fredericton for a while, which brought older people into elementary schools to work with the students. Lots of older people could really work with young kids. The kids seem to be working forever, disconnected, abandoned in a lot of ways by our society. And so I think if people are creative, they can come up with all sorts of ideas. And those are just a couple. Yeah.
What I'm wondering is whether there's flexibility in defining what old might be. Now, I'm looking at this from perhaps a jaundiced perspective. In the early to middle 1800s, when life expectancy was probably closer to 40 or less, old obviously had a very different meaning to what it is today. And yet, although we remain concerned about what old is and how the elderly are treated and all of the environment that you speak about, is it if it could be the case that life expectancy is extended further from what it is known to be today, will the concept of old change? And will the issues that you're raising then instead apply to an even older cohort?
That's an interesting question. Old is used in, of course, very, very many ways. When I think of old, because I'm a sociologist, I'm thinking of a social definition. And certainly when people live to 100, which is our fastest growing age group, then old is not the same as it was in terms of how old are you, the chronological age, as it would have been 100 years ago. That's absolutely true. The challenge is that labeling of people as old and treating them differently because we see them as old. If we can erode the discrimination in ageism, then maybe that definition can change. lots of people, maybe not lots of people, some people may try to use the word old sometimes to reclaim that as a reasonable term. But, and oddly, women live longer than men, but are considered old younger. So, and we thought that the baby boomers were going to change everything, but baby boomers seem more hysterical about staying young, you know, and have bought into the whole thing. So I don't know if that will change as baby boomers get older. So it's really complicated. And but my own personal, you know, expertise is in that social definition, and that when people begin to treat you differently, and when they begin to push you away. And more recently, I've noticed people telling me about seniors parties. And you know, research shows that a lot of older people, they don't want to join seniors organizations because they don't want to be with all those old people. So when people start telling me about going to seniors party, I also was kind of bristly, and I was trying to figure out, what is it about this that bothers me? And I realized it's not that I don't want to be in old people. I've spent my whole professional life hanging out with old people as much as I could. I just don't want to be with only old people. And that's the difference.
Just for fun. Sorry. I'm going to ask you a question that I think about a lot, and I suppose it's something that Bill, by the way, that Bill has asked for many years. Do we actually retain this category of old or being older? Is there any importance in retaining that, or is it something that we should get rid of and go towards kind of an age-integrated society, let's say?
Interesting, yeah. We like categories. It's hard to get rid of categories. I'm a great proponent of an age-integrated society. We start segregating by people by age when they're very young, so that, you know, if they're 6 years old, they're not supposed to play with people who are 8 years old, and it just continues up the line. I think that if we really could seriously erode the prejudices around aging, then we would figure out what will happen. We do like to categorize people, and I think we'll know we're making progress when the euphemisms start to disappear. Because euphemisms are an indication that we're uncomfortable with something. Euphemisms, we adopt them so that we can avoid the connotation. And then after a while, the euphemism becomes a magnet and it attracts the connotation, and then we need a new one. And when we see those seem to erode, then I think we know we've made progress.
Deborah, I've been working on trying to bust up the nuclear family for the past 20 years. Reason being, I miss extended family. And the extended family model has almost evaporated. Can you speak to that as far as models?
Yeah, we used to teach a class called the Sociology of the Family. We don't do that anymore because there is no the family anymore. So I think the models are quite burst asunder. Part of our problem has to do with our economic system that requires people to go where they can find work. If you went to New Brunswick, I mean, if you haven't been there in a while, if you've ever been there, you would be amazed at what's happened to New Brunswick. The young people have all left. My own children live in Ontario, Quebec, and Ontario, no, in Quebec. Two Quebecs and one Ontario. One's moving to Newfoundland. But anyway, they're gone, and that's what's happening. So living in the same household might not matter as much if we lived in the same neighborhood, if people wanted to. I think research shows that the extended family was never as common as we'd like to think it is, or was, because it sounds so great, it's sort of nostalgic. But I agree, I don't want to live. My parents, when they retired, they moved to Florida permanently. And I made a great effort. I spent 6 weeks in South Florida, if you can imagine, going from Canada to South Florida in the summer. Because I wanted my children to know my parents, and they did, and they were very close. But so part of that challenge is around geographic mobility. Myself, I don't want to live that far away from my kids, because I knew what it was like being the kid in that situation. But certainly our individualistic society, our capitalist society does not make it easy. And so I think that's where some of the answers are in changing our economic system a little bit and making it, thinking it's valuable, it has a value to us to be able to live near our family if we want to. Lots of people, they don't even get to live with their spouses. It's really broken up.
I have a question about nonconformists or nonconforming. So I've read and heard that as you get older, you become more of the same, or your characteristics are enforced or so forth, and there's some inflexibility. But if there is a great deal of non-conformism among old people, is that not a hindrance to changing other people's attitude? It's a bit of a clumsy question, but I hope you understand what I'm asking.
I'm not sure, but tell me if I've gotten it right. Part of the problem when there's a group that there's a prejudice against is that if you have a few people who are doing something that doesn't seem acceptable, then the whole group gets painted with the same brush. And so we see this, I mean, we've seen this in our Canada, in our political campaign, the last campaign. And so I don't think we should feel that we have to be sweet or agreeable. I'm not sure if this is what you're asking, just because it'll increase the stereotypes if we're not. Is that what you're asking? Yeah. What happens with stereotypes is that whenever we run into the stereotype, it reinforces the stereotype. With my students, I used to say, you're driving to university, and you're behind, and you know that I'm giving you an exam, and when the exam starts, I'm going to lock the door, and I'm not going to let you in. So you have to be there on time. So there's someone in front of you, and that person is driving really slowly, and you're worried about not getting into the exam. Who is that person? It's a little old lady. That's who it is. So say that car then passes you, and it is a little old lady, and you say, these old women, they're such slow drivers. Say that car passes you and it's a young, cool-looking guy. Do you say, oh, those young, cool-looking guys are such poor drivers, they're so slow? You don't. You go, huh. So stereotypes reinforce themselves that way. And the way that we can erode stereotypes is by knowing people as individuals. Without getting political, I hope. The value charters in Quebec was most popular among people who'd never met a Muslim in their lives. If they knew Muslims, they knew there were people just like anybody else. Same thing with old people. So I'm never going to be a sweet old lady. I've been warning my students about this for a very long time, and I don't intend to go down that road, and I hope you don't either.
I think there was one last question up here that I saw.
Yes, you can just.
Is it possible that there's reverse prejudice? I mean, you're seeing it as prejudice against the old. Is it, just for example, my best friend is a 7-year-old boy, okay? He is my best friend. I mean, we're inseparable. And I've always seen kids like that. I always have so much respect for kids. Isn't it possible that us older community have hesitations about making connections to the young?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say people do, because when you segregate people, it's very easy for them to develop uncomfortableness with one another. So even though there is that reverse, we also know that almost all movies are made for young people. Almost all ads are made for young people. Almost all clothes are made for young people. Almost all stories are designed for young people. We know that. The roads, we go back to the thing about the roads and driving, the roads are made for young men. If we lowered the speed a little, maybe, put road signs up so you can actually read them, and talk to older drivers about what their experience is and made some changes based on that, it wouldn't just benefit older drivers. It would benefit everybody.
Just like the doors with the button that you press to get in if you're in a wheelchair, it's not used just by people in wheelchairs, it's used by everybody, right? And so that's the challenge. But sure, whenever groups, and especially if you're a part of a group that's people are prejudiced against, then you really are nervous. But I think grandparents and young children, seem to have a nice affinity for one another. And that's a huge age range. But as long as we segregate by ages, people are going to be uncomfortable mixing the ages regardless.
Thank you. So I would just like to thank everyone for coming out today, thanking our speaker, the venue, and also our partners, the Karl Kinanen Lecture as an annual event, the Gilbert Center, JERAS, and the Alzheimer's Society. We are all here if you have questions after. And please join me in a final round of applause for our speaker today. Thank you.